Natalie from Earth and Flax is an expert on all things linseed. Today she's going to be taking us through the process of sealing a cedar deck using a mixture of linseed oil and pine tar. We're going to put a link to her website in the description. She ships all over the country. Now sit back, kick your boots off, and enjoy the rest of the video. La 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 la. Huzzah!
My name's Sasha from Philly Green Building. We're joined by Natalie from Earth and Flax. We are rebuilding a deck. This was installed 6 years ago. It is cedar, it was untreated. I think one of the things on the homeowner's to-do list was apply some sort of treatment to it. Never got around to it. Anyway, 6 years old, the wood is totally deteriorated. It's got mushrooms on it, it's got mold, it's been pitting out. It is totally rotten. So we are installing a new deck and we want to talk with Natalie about some products that we could use to make sure that, instead of 6 years, we get 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 years out of it.
And one of my favorite product combinations for any exterior, wood surface is the pine tar, if it's appropriate. I consider it a bit of more of a rustic finish and, great for cabins, timber frame structures, decks, outdoor furniture. This is the dark pine tar, so the most traditional pine tar option. It's 100% petrochemical free, and it's basically made from cooking down pine stumps. So it's the resins and terpenes that the tree used to protect itself, and we're actually able to sort of reintroduce that to the cedar we're working with today. And you've got to thin it with something because it's naturally quite viscous, so the purified linseed oil is the way to go. They work really, really well together. This is sort of your moisture protection, this is your UV protection, and you're kind of getting this incredible combination to protect and preserve the wood in the years to come.
Okay, so this is made from boiling down pine stumps.
Yeah.
Why the stumps?
So the pine stump has just a great concentration of resins and terpenes in the stump and in the roots, and so that's what pine tar was traditionally made with. And pine, as a tree species that happens to have like a high concentration of this good stuff that we can then make a product like this. The pine tar is just a pretty thick resinous material, and so you do need to thin it with something. Traditionally, you could use or have, they have always used like a high quality gum turpentine.
Okay.
But even though, gum turpentine is a natural product, not everything in nature is good for us. And so if we can avoid solvents, even if they're natural solvents, I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
And so if you use a high quality purified linseed oil like this brand, you don't need to use any solvents. It's your thinner, and then it also is sort of allowing more moisture protection. So they work really well together in giving sort of the moisture protection, sort of the cream on the dry skin, so to speak, and then this is your UV protection.
Okay, so we want this, the pine tar is really what helps protect the wood from like grain and degradation, comes with sunlight. Exactly. And the purified raw linseed oil will give it like the moisture protection, keep water out. Keep
it from cracking and opening up. Even on old dry wood, the oil is pretty incredible at self-healing often. Okay. Can't reverse damage necessarily, but it can kind of loosen, a cupped board. It can help, close up some small cracking and so on.
So if we have the railings of our deck that we don't have, it's on our budget to replace, they're in okay condition, the boards are trash, we need to replace, can we actually, stabilize some wood and give it a longer life by using something like the purified linseed oil?
Definitely. I think that my suggestion would be first do a sort of cleaning step of any wood that you want to save. If you have old wood, avoid power washing. It introduces too much moisture into a porous wood surface, but you would want to clean because most of these materials, all coatings really should be applied to a clean, dry surface. Okay. So hose water, we recommend linseed oil soap. It's just a great general wood surface cleaner. Stiff deck brush, a scrub pad, what have you. Clean dirt, carbon buildup, any organic growth from the old wood. You can see there was plenty of organic growth that had taken hold. So you want to remove that, rinse well and let it dry fully. And then we're at a step where you could do a primer coat of oil. I think because we're going, our plan is to use this product combo, so I think that it's okay to just start with a coat of your pine tar sort of mixture, and we're going to go with a light ratio of pine tar to oil, so more oil to pine tar in this case, to keep it sort of natural looking as much as possible for this specific deck.
So what if we want to keep something not as dark? What if we like the finish of unstained or undarkened wood? Is there a way to get a ratio, or do we is that something we need to accept if we want to get UV protection, or there always has to be some sort of color or pigmentation?
Pigmentation is your friend. So I would recommend that, and I try to encourage people to choose a darker finish if they can, simply because one, it will lighten over time, and then two, yes, that UV protection is really helpful. Weathering and aging and graying of the wood can be really beautiful, but it is damaging slowly and breaking down the lignin in the wood. So in a perfect world, I would love for that not to happen. But as you mentioned, a lot of folks like a natural finish. And so we could just use the oil by itself. It doesn't really have any UV protection, as moisture protection would help protect the wood. But I would recommend at least a little bit of dark pine tar in there, and we can do a high ratio of oil to pine tar and keep it as light as possible and still get some of the helpful properties of the pine tar in the mix.
So we have cedar decking that we got from Lowe's. It's nothing special about it. It's not particularly dense grain. It should be treated. That's what was on here before, and it failed in 5 years. So how much of a stretch to the life expectancy can we get by treating something with linseed oil or pine tar?
So I think the beauty of pine tar is that we really can take a relatively low-cost timber and increase its longevity, increase its lifespan. It's really the work that we need to put into it. If we, where you start, the quality of the timber, of course, matters. So if we, started with a more resinous timber, we just do 2 coats of pine tar and oil, and maybe we wouldn't touch it for 8 to 10 years. That's the maintenance sort of plan that the manufacturer recommends, 8 to 10 years for another coat. But if, we have a lower cost timber, that's fine. It's just maybe we'll need to check on it, every 5 years, or, maybe the first couple of years we'll put an additional maintenance coat on just to try to saturate the interior. Remember, these materials are soaking into the substrate. I guess not remember because we're bringing it up for the first time. But instead of sitting on the surface of the wood, the pine tar and oil are soaking into the substrate. We might be able to even show you a little bit of that today. And so we can always nourish the wood from the top. We never lose our chance to get more oil and more protection into that substrate. So we can make this wood that's nothing special, last for 100 years if we sort of stay up with maintenance. Does that make sense?
It does. So the next question was, what's the difference between these 2 products and polyurethane? Or what's the difference between this and something we would get at Home Depot or Lowe's or just any big box store? Why, if someone already has, a 10-year-old can of polyurethane that's half full, why would they, want to invest in something like this?
Yeah, and I think it is an investment. I think that's a great way to approach it. The materials are a little more expensive, maybe take a little longer to dry, maybe take a little bit more labor on the front end. But I think that the strategy that these aren't barrier forming coatings is really, really important, and people are trying and starting to understand the downsides of a lot of modern coatings that are basically plastics, where you're encapsulating the wood surface and you're trying to keep moisture out. Moisture always gets in, so it's not a strategy that's going to work in the years to come.
So when you say barrier forming, it's like permeability, breathability, and dryability is what we're going for, and what makes this, a great product to use?
Yeah, and it's interaction with the wood itself. Yes, water-based coatings might look like they're interacting with the substrate, but remember, water is sort of wood's worst enemy. That it's not giving anything of benefit to the wood. Oil is helping preserve and protect it, and that's kind of what we're looking for. We're trying to look for that compatibility between the coatings we're using and the wood that we're trying to protect and make last for a long time. You can see. I mean, this is pretty smooth. I don't think you'll have a problem, but if you ever see your oil and pine tar by the end of the day, it's still just sitting on the surface and you're wondering, gee, why is that?
Sure.
It could be that it's just you've already oversaturated it for what it can take now.
And do you just wipe off the rest of that if that
and
happens?
just wipe off the excess before the end of the
Okay.
day, and you just let it dry. Because it'll continue to travel.
It's amazing. It's already gone down like 3/16 of an inch.
Yeah.
It's penetrated through.
And it's a colder day.
Yeah. All right, so how does this get applied? We have an appreciation for this stuff, but we don't have any practical knowledge or skills with it yet. We've never used this. We've only used the paste rub on wax.
Yeah, and I guess we'll mention just oil for a second. The oil, you could use inside, like exposed wood beams. Some people use it for flooring, although I would say it's more of like a rustic farmhouse floor. Like I like the linseed oil wax for a floor, or the linseed oil varnish because it has more surface protection. But the oil can be used as a finish by itself sometimes. Most of the time it's going to be added to something. We may use this oil to make the Viking linseed oil wax that you've used. We add this oil with the pine tar. We add this with the paint and make linseed oil stain. So I think it's nice to test it with the wood so you can see that interaction. And you're just going to probably brush it on. You could use a clean cloth. The biggest thing is, even with the oil, you do want to apply relatively thin, even coats. If you just, glop it on, eventually it could just polymerize on the surface and you get it.
I want to get some without dripping down to the edge so we can see how much it penetrates.
Yeah, do it.
All right, so as long as it's not puddling, I'm good to go?
Yeah, I think so. And again, for something like this is pretty dry wood. We're going to be outside. If it was interior beams, maybe you would use a clean cloth and just wipe the oil on so you could control your application.
Okay. And if it's still, there's still puddles after an hour or so, just wipe it off with a clean cloth?
I would say before end of day.
Before end of day?
Yeah, especially if it's cooler out like today. If it's a really hot day, I don't think you're going to even run into that situation.
Sure. Whoa.
And immediately as I open up the lid here, you're going to smell that classic pine tar smell. So, a little does go a long way. We're going to mix up probably, 25-30% to our oil today, so you can test that out and see if that'll work for you for this project.
And the percentages, are they just based on replicability for color? Can it be too much, too little? Could it be a drop in a gallon, theoretically?
The lighter you go, and we have a good article about this on the Earth and Flax Learning Center if people are interested, but the lighter you go, the less UV protection you have. So if I just put a couple drops of pine tar in my oil right now, the wood will gray, it will silver with time, it might last and get some benefits of that oil and pine tar for sure, but it's not going to be your ideal scenario. So most projects use a 50-50, so 50% Viking purified raw linseed oil, 50% of your pine tar, but you can adapt that ratio based on personal preference. And again, just keep in mind, the lighter you go, you're missing out on some of the benefits, right?
Sure.
And we would the whole point is that we do the work now and we get the best possible results moving forward. So that's why I always am talking folks out of a super light finish. Because again, the pine tar and oil will lighten with time.
It smells really good.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it smells awesome.
And a fun fact, pine tar is made into a traditional soap. So we carry a pine tar soap. It's good for like eczema and other skin conditions, and it's like long history of use. And then also, this came up when we were talking, it is a natural insect deterrent. So another great reason that it's
good for a deck.
Good for a deck or any really exterior wood surface when it's appropriate.
Yeah, we had carpenter bees burrowing in the deck too, so we figured out a good way to get them out of there. So can't help, might hurt.
Yeah.
Can't hurt, might help.
They don't let this stuff. Great. So we'll probably put a little more oil into our bucket here. And we're not being that particular today. This is our first coat. We know we want a light finish. We're not doing a ton of dark pine tar. But if you were going to do a whole house, you would want to make sure your ratios are really consistent. You want to at least mix enough of your pine tar mixture for the entire side of your house or the side of the barn, right?
How long will it keep once it's mixed?
As long as you have a tight lid on it, indefinitely, pretty much.
Okay.
The pine tar and the oil don't go bad, so unopened, I try to store the metal containers in a dry location so they don't rust. I won't hurt the pine tar itself, but good practice. And then once mixed, once you start having oxygen, the oil eventually will start to skin over. So if we just left this brush in here, which we can do between days of pine tarring, brush storage.
Okay.
No point in cleaning your brush every day.
Amen.
So good storage. But eventually your oil will start to dry, will start to polymerize. So that's your factor. You'd want a container with a good lid, and then your pine tar mixture will last a very long time.
That's really cool how it's mixed in there too. It's
Yeah.
like in suspension. So what happens if this gets some other furniture, like plastic or whatever else? Come off easily?
If it has a finish, yeah, you can use the linseed oil soap and wipe off pretty easily.
So Natalie, how are you mixing this?
We're just looking for the formulation that you want. So as light as possible, I think. So I might just use the rest of your oil if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Yeah, let's just check it. See, I figured we'll do 50-50, and we just have combined these two cans together. And then
Okay.
it would have been, super straightforward.
And that would have been 50-50.
That would have been 50-50, yeah.
Gotcha.
A 3 liters approximately, they're a little bit different.
More or
but
less.
they're
The
more or less.
metric system, something or other, millimeters.
Yeah, so, you can see it's not that dark.
Okay, so we were just mixing, I don't want to say this out loud, but we were using an epoxy. And it really had to be mixed with the proper auger and the proper speed and the proper amount of time. Does this matter as long as it is mixed together? It's, once it's homogenized, it's good?
Yeah,
Cool.
I feel like I'm
You're like a witch.
making some kind of stew.
I know.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty forgiving. I mean, I think the biggest factors for working with the pine tar is they should be at least room temperature. Sometimes folks are trying to do stuff in October. The cans were out in the truck. Everything's cold, and then they go and put it on cold wood. Your absorption rate isn't going to be great.
Sure.
But in terms of, as long as everything's warm, yes, it's a cooler day today, but everything's fine. You mix it well. You do want to mix it probably before each use.
Okay.
So like tomorrow, or when you go to do your second coat, you will just want to make sure you give it a good stir.
And just a stick.
Yeah, that's fine. The oil and the pine tar are very, very forgiving. The biggest thing is if you're going to use like a pigmented pine tar, like the black pine tar is really popular, you'd want to be pretty consistent with your ratios and make sure, again, you're mixing enough of whatever it is you want to do. 50-50 is easy, but a lot of folks, especially with the black pine tar, want to do 30-70. I've had a wide range of sort of ratio choices when it comes to just a design preference.
Sure. So this is super dark right now. How do we know it's not going to be that dark? It can't be that dark going on there. Is there a rule of thumb, or do you just trial and error and, it's very easy to go lighter, but I'm sorry, it's much easier to go darker.
It's always easier to go darker, and it's always best to do a test if you can.
Okay.
So
We can actually use it one of these full boards.
Yeah, let's do it.
Stuff. It's got a really pretty knot in it, which is the next question. Like, how do we treat like knots like this? Do we ignore them? Do we fill them in?
I would just leave them
Okay.
with pine tar. If you're going to
It's easy for
paint, you could use the linseed oil putty and then paint with the linseed oil paint. But there's no filler product that will be able to move with the wood over time.
So if we have a knot like this or a slight imperfection in the wood, we're going to do more damage than harm, or make it more. We're going to draw more attention to it by trying to fill it in with a putty.
I think.
Okay. We just embrace the natural.
Embrace what the wood, if you really don't want to deal with like knots bleeding through, you unfortunately have to pay for clear wood. Pine tar doesn't really care. Knots are fine. If you have a knot fall out, for example, like maybe this one over time, pops out, you could actually do like a variation of a Dutchman repair. Just get a dowel that is that size, and you fit that into your sort of knot shape.
Does species matter? Does it have to be a cedar dowel?
Ideally, yes, but a wood dowel is better than epoxy.
Fair enough. Wood dowel's better than epoxy.
So We're getting a little bit of rain.
I know, does the rain matter? It's good for filming, which is why we're on kind of an overcast day, but does the raindrops...
It's not ideal to apply any coating when it's raining.
Okay.
But, you know, we can wipe this down. I think it's pretty intermittent. So if you want to...
So I think one of the things we were talking about earlier was washing wood with a hose versus pressure washing it. Like, if we want to prepare wood by washing and cleaning it, should we be using a pressure washer? Should we be using a hose? Should we, you know, should the wood be a little bit damp when we put it on, or should it be totally dry?
Great question. So we always recommend avoiding power washing because we don't want to introduce so much moisture into a wood surface. Power washing has become really an industry standard. And, you know, yes, after a couple days, the surface might feel dry to the touch, but there's been so much moisture pushed into that porous wood surface that it isn't going to be dry. You really, if you power wash it, you should allow it to dry for a couple of weeks, and that seems very inconvenient.
So if we're doing that before we paint or doing that in masonry and we're pressure washing, we're forcing the water in, and then like if we were using a latex paint or a plasticized sealer, that's what might cause bubbling and or moisture to drive inwards?
Yeah, you're encapsulating the moisture into that wood substrate. And putting a plastic coating around it. So I think these traditional materials should always be applied to a clean, dry surface. And for the pine tar, you do want a bare wood surface, no barrier forming coating, because it needs to be able to soak in to the substrate and so it can dry properly. So for prep, I always say, you know, regular hose water's fine. If it's old, dirty wood, you know, get a stiff deck brush, something that, you know, you can get you know, a little bit of elbow grease to clean off, and rinse well, let dry fully, and then when you have a dry surface or dry to the touch surface, you're probably good to go to apply your first coat. And yeah, maybe we can wipe this down real quick and then...
Cool. Let me grab the pressure washer.
Yeah, real quick.
Whoa, so much lighter.
Yeah, so that's why I was, you know, I don't really want you to be too afraid of putting a little bit of pine tar in there. And remember, this is red cedar? No, it seems kind of pale. No?
This is Lowe's cedar. Yeah. It's from the old growth forest of West Philadelphia. I think it's Alaskan yellow cedar, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yeah, it looks very yellow.
Is it easy enough for a GC to do?
Yeah, I think we should give it a try. What do you think?
Hey, you over there. Get over here. Sorry, GC joke. Which is not us, so we're pretty hands-on.
So I always try to encourage a little bit goes a long way. As you can see, I think we dipped, twice?
Yeah. If
that, and we would be able to cover this whole board. And one thing that I always try to, I say as like a mantra, and I think a lot of folks in the professions especially think, you know, I'm exaggerating, but a little really does go a long way, and putting thin coats is in your best interest. It is actually more efficient in the long run, because putting too much on, as our brush, putting too much on works against us in the big scheme of things. So, you know, you don't have to be really nitpicky about it, but I just want folks, when they kind of get used to this new stuff, to kind of keep that in mind, that we want to brush it.
Is there any risk of it drying a different color? Or like where you can see like a little bit of brush strokes that haven't soaked in yet because it's really cold in May?
Not with this material, no.
With this, it'll, you know, homogenize on there?
Yeah, because it's soaking in. I mean, unless you really like put way too much on. I've never had issues with, because remember, there's no actual like pigmentation in the dark pine tar. Mm-hmm. Some of the pigmented pine tar actually has like oxide pigments added. Okay. But the dark pine tar, it's just the pigmentation comes from just the sort of cooking of the pine stem, so that the natural processing of that manufacturing process. And so ideally, we're not leaving that much on the surface. Okay. Yes, we'll have a little bit of surface buildup, but it's not like painting where we're building up coats of paint. And that's why pine tar is so forgiving and why it's so versatile. You know, you can use it on outdoor furniture as well as a big old barn. So back to being forgiving. Say we're in like a dusty area. Say it's a construction site. There's pollen. Polyurethane I typically don't like because it has to be like a sterile environment. Like we polyed stairs and, you know, someone closed the wrong window and opened the other window and it blew drywall dust into everything. Obviously we don't want to do that with this, but
You know, if this gets a little bit of dust on there, or it gets a little bit of gunk or grime, is that going to ruin the coat? Is it going to encapsulate in there? What if a bug lands on it?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of flexibility for sure. In a perfect scenario, you want to do it on a day that's not super windy, just because yes, if we get a ton of stuff stuck in our finish, it might not look as pretty, but if you do, or suddenly there's all these bugs for whatever reason, and you get it in your finish, you would wait to let it dry completely. And then the painters have a saying of breaking the legs, and this can only be done when the finish is completely dry, and then we can take a clean cloth and just wipe those surfaces down and kind of break off anything that might be stuck in that surface.
The legs.
The legs. So patience, if you have that panic moment, you don't try to go and pick out the bugs. Just let it be, let it dry, come back, wipe it down, and if needed, if there's some super weird gunk, yeah, you could take a sanding block and maybe hit a few spots. But in a perfect world, you just let it be.
As close to maintenance-free existence as possible. Different sealers, different preservatives, and everything's natural, solvent-free, and environmentally friendly.